today's video, I came up with a fun project. Using a large Bristol board or other large sheet of paper, take the largest plate that you have and trace the largest circle. 1/2-inch measurements around the edge in several spots to allow you to make a smaller circle on the inside. You can also use the edge of the plate itself to help you make smooth curves. You can then paint this in with a dark color, like a gouache or an acrylic paint. I advise more of a solid dark color, just so that it creates a circular frame. This is going to be a porthole to represent viewing out of a circular window into an underwater world. Decide which type of paint you will use based on what you prefer. I advise it is acrylic, gouache, or acryl gouache, which is technically a type of acrylic. You can also add acrylic matte medium into gouache to turn it into acryl gouache. Beware, acrylic paint cannot be reactivated when it dries. I prefer gouache. It's become my favorite medium, tied with digital, and I'm really enjoying it. All these colors here are from my Mia Gouache 56 set, and I'm using some of my largest, softer brushes, including filbert head, and I'm using natural sea sponges. I'm also making the paint watery and using the white of the paper in a watercolor style. I'm also going to be using lifting techniques because the type of paper I'm using is easy to lift the gouache back up of in order to make highlights. If you use acrylic paint, once it dries, it's set. So you'll have to layer the highlights back on, in the case of how you'd paint this, with actual white and other colors like that. So the techniques you use are based on the paint you use. If you have very large sheets of watercolor paper, you can of course paint in watercolor on that paper to make the view in the porthole. Before beginning this, I looked at lots of reference of underwater scenes. I was thinking freshwater. So this view is supposed to be in a fantasy underwater freshwater river, a very large river or a lake. I'm making it semi-blurry and semi-abstracted because I want the background to be relaxing and also not the focus. I'll be doing different animals to place on top and take them out carefully by making the back coated in double-sided washi tape. As you can see, I'm lifting. I'm using a soft brush with clean water and I'm pushing down with a paper towel after streaking it and lifting back up. I use lifting techniques a lot in this picture, and I do recommend it for large backgrounds which have different highlights and fuzzy lighting effects in them. I recommend it with gouache and watercolor. When you want to get these sort of lighting effects, you'd have to use a different technique with acrylics, of course. Here I cut them out. Now I use a self-healing cutting mat in a moment after I cut the outer edge with the scissors. I very carefully take an X-Acto blade. As you can see, I'm rotating the circle to make it easier on my wrist. Keep rotating the circle. Don't do what's hard on your wrist, do what's easier for your wrist. Using the circle from the inside of the porthole, I'm going to design and paint a fish. Off screen, I designed this species of fish and took notes. I made a pencil and colored pencil drawing I'm looking at as reference, and I looked up lots of different species of salmon and trout in order to design my own. I wanted it to be a sort of common river fish that would be present, and I picked a location on my main world to suit it. There is a continent called Nalazine on my main world of Alpha Vatar. I haven't filled in much for it, so I decided to start filling in a river there, the Anduhara River Basin, and that is what most of the creatures will be that I'll be making for the porthole. This is the Nalazine southern salmon, a common and delicious fish that is eaten by many different people and animals. They don't always die out when they spawn, though some years there's a dying where they reinvigorate the land, and other times they are present in the river all year round, and other times they return to the sea. This would be a sort of common river fish, and I decided I should depict a sort of common salmon, and I looked up a lot of different species to figure out what I should base it on. This is not exactly like any real world fish. While painting it, I'm also trying to get texture from certain brushes to imply scale patterning rather than painting every scale in. Even though there would be highlighting coming from the surface of the water, I wanted the very top of the back of the fish to literally be intended to be perceived as if it is a darker color, to represent the counter shading often found in nature. I had a pencil drawn reference which showed different poses as well as a colored pencil and pencil drawing, as I said. And I'd previously looked up a lot of reference, particularly on salmons of a similar variety to the type of fish I was creating here. But I wasn't actively looking at the real-world references while painting this, just my own sketches. As you can see, I choose to turn the page for what's easier for my wrist rather than forcing my wrist to have trouble working around different angles. I highly advise you do this when working on your own art. Sometimes YouTubers don't turn the page simply for the sake of the video so that things aren't confusing to the viewer. However, I do highly advise, if you're not filming, that you turn the page. In the case of this, I decided to include all the turning so that people understood that this is probably a better idea. This old soft brush makes an interesting texture, so I decided to use it here to make a pattern on the green section of the fish. There will also be some nice brown spots coming up soon. Between certain layers on this fish, I did have to let it dry. Although gouache dries quite quickly, so I didn't have to be that patient that often. The reddish brown I'm using for the eye color is mirrored in the spots on the fish, so that the spots could sort of distract from where the real eye is present, which many animals, including many fish, have in their biology. The other thing to note is that I decided to make it equivalent in size to a sockeye salmon, so about 33 inches or 84 centimeters. For this project, you can test things out on the scraps of paper or around the figure. Please do reuse the center of the circle for the porthole. You can draw other small fish or sea life in the other sections of the paper, particularly if it's an expensive or hard to get paper you don't want to waste. And remember to test out different brushes for texture. This whole project should also be a learning process, so you can learn how to use your brushes and your paint and everything you have even better. As you can see, I'm adding a dark spot in the center, which also represents mirroring the pupil. It's an almost black-brown mix. I also decided that I definitely wanted the edge of all the fins to be a darker color, which was also part of the original design. Before doing any final published work of fantasy creations, be they really realistic to the real world or very fantastical, you can still do further iterations. So, for example, I darkened and brightened the green along the back from my original design on the actual gouache painting I did here, rather than keeping it quite as pale and silvery as in my other design. However, there can also be variation in the species. Now I'm going to go in and cut out that other painting, the sea background, or rather the underwater background for the river, carefully cutting things out with a sharp pair of scissors. You can also use the self-healing cutting mat and X-Acto blade. Be very careful not to go over the edges and actually cut into the actual creature. Rotate the paper as needed. Don't hold it rigid and still. Tilt everything to be the best for your hands. Double over pieces of washi tape to make double-sided tape that can be removed without damaging the painting underneath to assemble. Once again, that's all for this video. If you like my videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell to all notifications so you will know when a new video comes up. I aim for new videos every Wednesday, but sometimes life happens and things are delayed. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you with another one very soon.